The screaming started at exactly 2:47 p.m. on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Sunset Ridge Commons, a cookie-cutter subdivision where the grass was always green, the driveway spotless, and the homeowners association ruled with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive velvet. Marcus Rodriguez had been enjoying a rare day off from his duties as deputy fire marshal, sitting on his back patio with a cold beer and yesterday's newspaper, when the shrieking voice of Linda Pemberton cut through the summer air like nails on a chalkboard. "This is ABSWFELO unacceptable. I demand to speak to whoever is in charge." Marcus sighed, setting down his beer with the resignation of a man who knew his peaceful afternoon had just evaporated. He'd lived in Sunset Ridge for 3 years now, long enough to recognize Linda's distinctive brand of righteous fury from 2 blocks away. At 52, Linda Pemberton was the self-appointed sheriff of subdivision violations, a woman whose entire identity revolved around her position as HOA board president and her uncanny ability to spot a dandelion from 40 yards. The commotion was coming from the direction of the community pool, and Marcus could already picture the scene. Linda, in her usual uniform of pressed khakis and a polo shirt emblazoned with the HOA logo, her blonde highlights perfectly styled despite the heat, standing with her hands on her hips in that particular stance that said she was about to make someone's day significantly worse. Marcus had always found it ironic that he moved to Sunset Ridge for the peace and quiet. After 15 years in fire safety, dealing with everything from kitchen fires to chemical spills, he thought a planned community would offer the tranquility he craved. Instead, he discovered that HOA drama could be just as explosive as any emergency he handled professionally. "I said, where is the manager?" Linda's voice had reached a pitch that was making dogs bark 3 streets over. Unable to ignore the spectacle any longer, Marcus wandered toward the pool area, his curiosity getting the better of him. The community pool was the crown jewel of Sunset Ridge Commons, a kidney-shaped oasis surrounded by perfectly manicured landscaping, complete with a poolside pavilion and enough lounge chairs to accommodate half the neighborhood. It was also, Marcus noticed as he approached, completely locked up with a chain and industrial padlock around the gate. Linda stood facing off against Tommy Chen, the 19-year-old college student who worked part-time as the pool maintenance guy. Tommy looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by the deer-in-headlights expression of someone who'd accidentally wandered into a minefield. "Ma'am, I already explained," Tommy was saying, his voice strained with forced politeness. "The health department ordered us to close the pool until we can fix the filtration system. There's bacteria in the water that I don't care about bacteria." Linda exploded, her face turning a shade of red that rivaled the stop sign at the entrance to their subdivision. "Do you have any idea how much money the residents of this community pay in HOA fees? Do you understand that access to this pool is a fundamental part of our property value?" Marcus couldn't help but smirk at Linda's logic. In her world, property values trump public health every time. He'd seen her argue that speed bumps were unnecessary because they might scratch luxury car bumpers, and that playground equipment should be removed because children made too much noise. The woman had a gift for prioritizing convenience over common sense. "The padlock stays until we get clearance," Tommy said, his teenage confidence finally asserting itself. "I'm not going to be responsible for making people sick." "You're a pool boy." Linda's voice had now reached frequencies that were probably causing wildlife to evacuate the area. "You do not have the authority to make decisions about community amenities. I am calling an emergency board meeting, and you will unlock this pool immediately, or I will have you fired." Several neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion like rubberneckers at a traffic accident. Marcus recognized most of them. The Johnsons from Maple Street, old Mrs. Patterson who lived next to the tennis courts, and the new couple who'd moved in last month and probably hadn't yet learned to avoid Linda at all costs. Tommy looked around desperately, clearly hoping someone would come to his rescue. His eyes landed on Marcus, and there was something close to pleading in his expression. Marcus took a step forward, intrigued despite himself. This was about to get interesting. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying the calm authority that came from years of managing crisis situations. "Is there a problem here?" Linda whirled around, her eyes lighting up with the predatory gleam of someone who'd found a new target for her outrage. She looked Marcus up and down, taking in his casual shorts and t-shirt. Clearly dismissing him as another resident she could bulldoze into submission. "And you are?" she demanded, crossing her arms and tilting her head in that particular way that said she was about to deliver a lecture on proper neighborhood hierarchy. "Marcus Rodriguez. I live over on Cedar Lane." He gestured vaguely in the direction of his house, maintaining his relaxed posture despite the tension crackling in the air. "Well, Mr. Rodriguez," Linda said, drawing out his name like it tasted sour, "this doesn't concern you. This is an HOA matter involving community amenities and a very insubordinate employee who seems to think he can make unilateral decisions about our facilities." Tommy shot Marcus a grateful look. Sir, I was just trying to explain that the health department has nino gurisdictio in here. Linda interrupted, her voice reaching new decibel levels. This is a private community. We self-govern. That's the entire point of having an HOA. She turned back to Marcus, apparently deciding he looked sympathetic to her cause. Can you believe this? I pay $1,200 a year in fees, and this child thinks he can lock me out of my own pool. Marcus nodded thoughtfully, stroking his chin. That does sound frustrating. But I'm curious, what exactly did the health department say about the water? Tommy straightened up, clearly relieved to have someone actually listen. There's a bacterial contamination. E. coli levels are through the roof. The filtration system's been acting up for weeks, and yesterday's test results came back critical. The inspector said if anyone swims in there, they could end up in the hospital with serious intestinal infections. Lies, Linda shrieked. Absolute fabrication. I was in that pool just 3 days ago, and I feel perfectly fine. Ma'am, Marcus said gently, bacterial contamination can take several days to manifest symptoms, and E. coli isn't something to mess around with. It can cause kidney failure, especially in children and elderly people. Linda's face contorted with rage. Are you seriously taking his side? Do you know who I am? I am the president of this HOA. I have been protecting property values in this community for 7 years. I have personally prevented this neighborhood from turning into some kind of ghetto by enforcing standards and maintaining amenities. The small crowd of neighbors had grown larger, and Marcus could see several people pulling out their phones. In the age of social media, HOA meltdowns had become prime entertainment content. He almost felt sorry for Linda. Almost. I understand your position, Marcus said diplomatically, but public health laws supersede HOA authority. If a health department has ordered the pool closed, it stays closed. According to who? Linda's voice had now reached a frequency that was making nearby car alarms chirp in sympathy. You're just another resident. You have no more authority here than anyone else. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor, leaned over to the Johnsons. Should we call someone? She looks like she might have a stroke. Linda spun toward the whispering neighbors. I can hear you. And for your information, I am in perfect health. Unlike the rest of you, I actually REA'd the CC&Rs. I know our rights, and our rights include access to community amenities that we pay for. Tommy was backing away slowly, clearly hoping to escape before Linda's fury turned back to him. But Linda wasn't done with her audience. This is exactly what's wrong with this neighborhood, she continued, gesturing wildly at the assembled crowd. Nobody respects authority anymore. Nobody understands the sacrifices I make to keep your property values high. Do you think the landscaping maintains itself? Do you think the tennis courts resurface themselves? I am the only thing standing between Sunset Ridge Commons and complete chaos. Marcus watched the performance with the detached fascination of someone observing a natural disaster. He'd seen people under stress before, house fire victims, accident scenes, emergency evacuations, but Linda's brand of suburban hysteria was something entirely different. This wasn't fear or panic. This was pure, concentrated entitlement having a public meltdown. Furthermore, Linda continued, now addressing Marcus directly, if you think you can waltz over here and undermine my authority with your little health department sympathizer routine, you're sadly mistaken. I will be filing complaints with the county, the state, and anyone else who will listen about this harassment of law-abiding homeowners. The moment had come. Marcus reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet, extracting a leather credential case with practiced ease. He flipped it open, revealing the gleaming badge and identification card that read, Deputy Fire Marshal, County Fire Safety Division. Actually, ma'am, he said, his voice taking on the official tone he used for code violations and safety inspections. I think there might be some confusion about jurisdiction here. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Linda's face went through a remarkable transformation, from rage red to confused pink to oh shit white in the span of about 3 seconds. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, and for the first time since Marcus had known her, Linda Pemberton was completely speechless. The crowd pressed closer, sensing that the drama had just reached a new level. Someone in the back whispered, "Is that a real badge?" And another voice responded, "Holy crap, it is." Marcus held the credential case steady, letting Linda get a good look at the official seal, his photograph, and most importantly, the words that granted him authority she never dreamed he possessed. Deputy Fire Marshal Marcus Rodriguez, County Fire Safety Division. I have jurisdiction over public health and safety matters in this entire county, including private communities. Linda's eyes darted between the badge and Marcus's face, her brain clearly struggling to process this new information. The woman who'd been screaming about authority 30 seconds ago was suddenly face to face with someone who actually had it. That can't be real, she stammered, but her voice had lost all its earlier conviction. You live here. You're just a neighbor. I've seen you mowing your lawn. Fire marshals are allowed to have lawns, ma'am, Marcus replied dryly. We're also allowed to have days off, which is what I was enjoying until your shouting interrupted my afternoon. Tommy Chen looked like Christmas had come early. The teenager who'd been cowering under Linda's verbal assault was now grinning from ear to ear, clearly enjoying the cosmic justice of the situation. So, Marcus continued, closing his credential case and slipping it back into his pocket. Let's discuss this bacterial contamination issue. Tommy, you mentioned E. coli levels were critical. Yes, sir, Tommy said, standing up straighter. The health department inspector came out yesterday after I called in the test results. She said the numbers were off the charts dangerous, way beyond what's safe for human contact. Marcus nodded professionally. And the filtration system. Been acting up for 3 weeks. I've been treating it with extra chemicals, but the bacterial load is too high. The inspector said the whole system needs to be drained, cleaned, and probably upgraded before anyone can use it safely. Very responsible of you to follow protocol, Marcus said, and Tommy practically glowed with the praise. Linda had been listening to this exchange with growing horror, watching her authority evaporate like pool water in the summer heat. Wait just a minute, she said, trying to regain her footing. Even if you are a fire marshal, this is still an HOA matter. We have rules and procedures. We have a board. Ma'am, Marcus said patiently, HOA rules don't supersede county health and safety codes. If this pool is contaminated with dangerous bacteria, it stays closed. That's not a suggestion. It's a legal requirement. But the property values, Linda wailed, the amenities are essential to maintaining our community standards. Property values won't matter much if your neighbors are hospitalized with kidney failure, Marcus pointed out. E. coli contamination can kill people, especially children and elderly residents. Mrs. Patterson, who'd been listening from the crowd, spoke up. My grandson visits every weekend. He's only 5 years old. She looked at Linda with newfound disgust. You're going to let children swim in contaminated water? I didn't know it was contaminated, Linda protested. You never told me it was dangerous. She pointed accusingly at Tommy. Ma'am, Tommy said, his teenage voice cracking slightly, I've been trying to explain this situation for 20 minutes. You kept screaming at me. Several neighbors in the crowd murmured agreement. The Johnsons nodded vigorously, and someone called out, We all heard you yelling at him. Linda looked around desperately, realizing that her audience had completely turned against her. The woman who'd been demanding respect and authority moments ago was now facing a circle of disgusted neighbors and a county official who could actually back up his words with legal power. This is harassment, she said weakly. I'm being targeted because I try to maintain standards in this community. No, ma'am, Marcus said firmly. You're being corrected because you were trying to force a teenager to violate public health orders. That's not maintaining standards. That's endangering lives. Linda's last desperate gambit came out as a strangled whisper. I'll call the county supervisor. I'll report you for living in the community you're supposed to regulate. That's a conflict of interest. Marcus actually chuckled at that. Ma'am, I live in this community specifically because I wanted to keep an eye on code compliance. The county encourages fire marshals to live in their jurisdictions. It's not a conflict of interest. It's a public service. The crowd was now openly enjoying Linda's humiliation. Phones were definitely recording, and Marcus could already imagine the YouTube videos. HOA Karen gets owned by fire marshal or pool meltdown goes wrong. Linda seemed to realize this too, because she looked around at all the cameras with growing panic. Turn those off, she demanded. This is a private community matter. Actually, Marcus said helpfully, since this involves public health violations, it's very much a public matter. These folks have every right to document what happens in their community. Linda Pemberton, terror of the HOA board, scourge of dandelions and unauthorized mailbox colors, finally realized she was completely and utterly defeated. But Linda Pemberton hadn't clawed her way to the top of the HOA hierarchy by accepting defeat gracefully. As the reality of her situation sank in, something desperate and dangerous flickered in her eyes. The look of a cornered animal preparing for one final, reckless attack. Fine, she said, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper that was somehow more unsettling than her earlier screaming. You want to play the authority card? Two can play that game. She pulled out her phone with theatrical precision, her fingers flying across the screen. I'm calling my lawyer, and the county commissioner, and Channel 7 News. She looked up at Marcus with what she clearly thought was a triumphant expression. We'll see how your superiors feel about you harassing law-abiding citizens who are simply trying to protect their property investments. Marcus crossed his arms, looking more amused than concerned. Ma'am, you're certainly welcome to make those calls, but you might want to think about what you're going to tell them. I'm going to tell them that a county employee is abusing his position to intimidate residents of a private community, Linda declared, her voice rising again. I'm going to tell them that you're probably taking bribes from the pool maintenance company to force expensive repairs. The crowd gasped. Even for Linda, accusing a fire marshal of corruption was a bold new level of crazy. Tommy's mouth fell open in shock, and several neighbors began backing away as if Linda's derangement might be contagious. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his professional calm never wavering, "I'd be very careful about making accusations like that. False allegations against public officials are a serious matter." But Linda was past the point of rational thought. The humiliation of being publicly corrected, combined with the loss of her absolute authority, had clearly snapped something in her brain. "You think your little badge protects you?" "I know people. I have connections. The mayor's wife is in my book club." "That's nice," Marcus replied. "Does the mayor's wife know about E. coli contamination protocols?" "Don't you dare patronize me," Linda shrieked, and suddenly she was moving toward the pool gate, fumbling with the chain and padlock. "I'll show you who has a authority here." "Ma'am, stop," Marcus commanded, his voice taking on the sharp edge he used for emergency situations. "Do not tamper with that lock." But Linda was beyond listening. She grabbed the chain with both hands, yanking and twisting with surprising strength. "This is my pool, my community. You can't keep me out." The crowd watched in horrified fascination as the president of their HOA completely lost her mind over a swimming pool. Mrs. Patterson clutched her chest, probably wondering if she needed to call 911. The Johnson family was backing toward their car, clearly deciding this was no longer entertainment, but a genuine mental health crisis. "I'll leave you here." Linda screamed at the padlock as if volume alone could make it submit to her will. "I pay fees, I enforce rules. This pool obeys me." Tommy looked at Marcus desperately. Should we do something?" Marcus was already moving. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the gate immediately. You're interfering with the public health order." "I don't care about your health order." Linda spun around, her hair disheveled, her face streaked with sweat and rage. "I care about PRT values. I care about community standards. I care about people knowing their place." And there it was, the truth that had been lurking beneath all of Linda's talk about rules and regulations. This wasn't about pool access or bacterial contamination or even HOA authority. This was about control, pure and simple. Linda Pemberton had built her entire identity around being the person who decided what was acceptable in Sunset Ridge Commons, and the thought of someone else having power over her domain was literally driving her insane. "Ma'am," Marcus said firmly, "I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from the gate and calm down." "Or wait," Linda challenged, her voice hoarse from screaming. "You'll arrest me? You'll write me a ticket? You're just a fire marshal. You can't touch me." Marcus pulled out his phone. "Actually, ma'am, interfering with public health orders is a criminal offense, and threatening a public official is another one. I think it's time to call this in." The sight of Marcus dialing seemed to break through Linda's rage-induced haze. For the first time since the confrontation began, she looked genuinely afraid. "Wait, what are you doing?" "Calling the police," Marcus said matter-of-factly. "You've committed at least 2 misdemeanors in the last 5 minutes, and you're clearly not going to calm down on your own." "You can't call the police on me," Linda gasped. "I'm the HOA president. I'm a pillar of this community." "You're also someone who just threatened a county official and attempted to tamper with public health safety measures," Marcus replied, holding his phone to his ear. "Yes, this is Deputy Fire Marshal Rodriguez. I need a unit at Sunset Ridge Commons pool area. I have a resident who's interfering with a health department closure order and making threats." Linda's face went white as she realized the gravity of her situation. The woman who spent years calling authorities on her neighbors for minor infractions was about to be on the receiving end of law enforcement attention. "This isn't over," she whispered, but all the fight had gone out of her voice. "This isn't over by a long shot." Officer Sarah Martinez arrived 12 minutes later, stepping out of her patrol car with the weary expression of someone who dealt with HOA disputes before. She took one look at the scene, a disheveled middle-aged woman sitting on a pool chair looking defeated, a crowd of neighbors with their phones out, and a man in shorts holding official credentials, and sighed deeply. "Deputy Rodriguez," she asked, recognizing Marcus from interagency meetings, "what do we have here?" "Interference with a public health order and threats against a public official," Marcus replied professionally, though Linda noticed he was trying not to smile. "The resident attempted to force open a health department closure and made accusations of corruption when I identified myself." Officer Martinez looked at Linda, who was now staring at her hands like a scolded child. "Ma'am, is this accurate?" Linda's voice came out as a croak. "I was just trying to protect property values." "By breaking into a contaminated pool?" Officer Martinez asked incredulously. Ma'am, do you understand that E. coli contamination can cause serious illness or death? I didn't think it was that dangerous, Linda mumbled. Tommy stepped forward, his earlier fear replaced by righteous indignation. Officer, she's been screaming at me for weeks about keeping the pool open. Even after I showed her the health department report, she said bacteria was fake news designed to hurt property values. Officer Martinez looked at Linda with the same expression most people reserve for discovering something unpleasant on their shoe. Ma'am, I'm going to need to see some identification. As Linda fumbled for her wallet, Marcus noticed the crowd of neighbors had grown to include practically half the subdivision. Word had apparently spread through the neighborhood faster than gossip at a church potluck. He recognized faces from streets he'd never even walked down, all drawn by the spectacular sight of their HOA president's public meltdown. Linda Pemberton, Officer Martinez read from the license. Sunset Ridge Commons OA president. She looked up with fresh understanding. Oh, you're that Linda Pemberton. What do you mean, that Linda Pemberton? Linda asked weakly. Ma'am, we've received 17 complaints about you in the past 6 months. Harassment of residents, abuse of HOA authority, false emergency calls. Officer Martinez consulted her notepad. You called us last week because someone's grass was half an inch too long. The crowd murmured with satisfaction. Apparently, Linda's reign of suburban terror was well documented with local law enforcement. Those were legitimate code violations. Linda protested, trying to summon her old authority. Ma'am, Officer Martinez said firmly, measuring your neighbor's grass with a ruler at 6 a.m. is not normal behavior, and calling 911 because someone painted their mailbox the wrong shade of blue is a misuse of emergency services. Marcus watched Linda's face as the officer continued listing her complaints. This was better than cable television. But one who terrorized an entire neighborhood with her petty tyranny was getting a very public accounting of her behavior from someone with actual authority. Now, Officer Martinez continued, Deputy Rodriguez tells me you threatened him and attempted to tamper with the health department closure. Is that accurate? Linda looked around desperately, as if searching for support from the crowd of neighbors who'd been documenting her humiliation. Instead, she found faces full of satisfaction, justice, and more than a little schadenfreude. I may have gotten a little emotional, she admitted quietly. A little emotional, Mrs. Patterson called out from the crowd. You screamed that he was taking bribes and tried to break into a contaminated pool. You threatened to have him fired for doing his job, added Mr. Johnson. You called public health orders fake news. Tommy chimed in, clearly enjoying his moment of vindication. Officer Martinez held up a hand for quiet. Ma'am, I'm going to issue you a citation for interference with public health measures and disorderly conduct. If you make any more threats against Deputy Rodriguez or attempt to tamper with that pool closure, you'll be arrested. Do you understand? Linda nodded miserably, accepting the ticket like a condemned woman receiving her sentence. Furthermore, Officer Martinez continued, I'm recommending that the county review your HOA's authority. Residents have the right to be protected from harassment even from their homeowners association. The crowd actually applauded at that announcement. Marcus had to admit it was deeply satisfying to watch someone who'd abused their tiny slice of power finally face real consequences. As Officer Martinez finished her paperwork and prepared to leave, she turned to Marcus. Deputy, anything else you need from me? Just one thing, Marcus said, looking directly at Linda. Ma'am, I want to be very clear about something. This pool stays closed until the health department gives clearance. If I find out you've been pressuring Tommy or anyone else to ignore safety protocols, I'll be back with more than just a citation. Public health isn't negotiable. Linda nodded again, looking smaller and more defeated than anyone had ever seen her. As the crowd began to disperse, neighbors approached Marcus to thank him. Mrs. Patterson shook his hand gratefully. The Johnsons invited him to their barbecue next weekend. Even the new couple introduced themselves and expressed relief that someone had finally stood up to Linda's tyranny. Tommy walked over as Marcus was heading home. Deputy Rodriguez, thank you. I was really scared I was going to lose my job over this. You did the right thing, Tommy, Marcus replied. Never compromise public safety because someone's yelling at you. There are always people with real authority who will back you up. As Marcus walked back to his house, you could see Linda still sitting by the pool, staring at the locked gate like she couldn't quite believe what had happened. Her phone lay silent in her lap. Apparently, her threats to call lawyers and news stations had been as empty as her authority. Marcus grabbed a fresh beer from his fridge and settled back onto his patio, finally able to enjoy his day off. In the distance, he could hear neighbors talking excitedly about the afternoon's drama, and he suspected the story would become neighborhood legend. Sometimes justice came in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes it came with a badge and the authority to back it up. The pool remained closed for another 2 weeks while the entire filtration system was upgraded. When it finally reopened, Linda Pemberton was notably absent from the celebration. In fact, she was notably absent from most neighborhood activities after that day. The HOA meetings, however, became much more civil. Funny how that worked.